I'm here with Richard Florida. He is one of the preeminent thinkers around urbanism, cities, all that kind of stuff. Richard, what brings you to Detroit, and why is Detroit an interesting place for this CityLab conference?
Well, partly it's my hometown. My original hometown is Newark, and I spent nearly 20 years in Pittsburgh, and it's a really trying time for Pittsburgh now. But my wife is from Detroit, and she comes from a huge family, a family of 6 kids, and we have 2 little kids, so my kids' dozen cousins are here. So Detroit really feels in part like my hometown, or at least my in-law hometown. And I've been coming here for a long time. I was here. I had a very good friend who moved here after college. I followed the Tigers. I think they won the World Series back in '67. It was when Denny McLain and Mickey Lolich. And I was here when the Tigers won their World Series. I guess it was in the late '80s. So I've tracked this city from a long time and watched it, when it was really hard pressed. And then in particular, I've watched this kind of amazing revival. So, we're staying downtown. We're at the Foundation Hotel. We're here for this event. So I think watching Detroit, also Pittsburgh, watching older industrial cities come back, as someone who spent the better part of my adult life in the Great Lakes region or in the so-called Rust Belt, watching these great cities come back has really been quite amazing to me. So that's why I'm here. The other thing is, I was part of the group that founded this conference from the Atlantic and the Aspen Institute with the support of the Bloomberg Philanthropies. So it's been in kind of megacities, right? It's been in London and New York and LA and Paris and Miami, which is a global city with a window to Latin America. So it's great to see it here.
What about Detroit's progress in the last few years post-bankruptcy has surprised you, or things that you didn't expect would happen?
Well, I always predicted Detroit would come back, and I think the reason had less to do with the kind of fabric of the urban core, which is magnificent, right? Dan Gilbert, who I'll be talking to here, his great quote is, I found a skyscraper sale going on and decided to buy it. But, when you have several great research universities, Wayne State in town, Michigan State and the University of Michigan at scale at the, close by, adjacent to the metro. And then you have this airport, one of the United States and the world's great hub airports. Hard to, and then a place that has long been open to talent from around the world, has a large and vibrant African-American community that's been incredibly innovative and enriching, huge Arabic community, Asian community, we can go on. So a huge influx of not just automotive money, but foreign transplant money. So I've always been high on Detroit's revival. I think what struck me is I wouldn't have guessed so much in the core. I would have thought a lot of it would stay in the suburbs, the Birmingham, Royal Oak, Ferndale area. What to me is so amazing is how great this downtown is. And I say this from a point of view of experience. I spent every Thanksgiving here for the past dozen years because my wife's from here. And that means I go to the parade in the morning and I go to the Lions game in the afternoon. And just to see how that's changed. I mean, that's always been good, but to see how the downtown has changed and come around. And, when my mother-in-law, who's from Amman, says to me, Richard, I go to downtown Detroit now and it reminds me of Amman or Paris, from a 70-plus-year-old Arabic lady. That's pretty cool. So, I think it's a city that really has a lot going for it. The thing is that I find sometimes hard is you can't generalize from Detroit or Pittsburgh. They are in many ways special cases. Pittsburgh with the great universities like Carnegie Mellon right near the urban core. Both communities have had amazing philanthropy, both old and new money, right? They've had all the old philanthropies that have put money in against the new money like Gilbert's money or the Illich's money and more. So it's hard to say, can this happen in Cleveland? Can it happen in Akron? Can it happen in Toledo? But I think the fact that it's happened in Detroit is a big thing and a great thing.
One of your most recent pieces about commuting and how people commute affects how they think politically made me think about challenges, because commuting is a challenge at times in Metro Detroit. What are some of the challenges you see in the comeback and things that we could work to address?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, there are 2 big challenges I see in this region still. One is still so much of the region is tilted towards the suburbs. And there is still, regardless of how we want to try to make nice, there is still an enormous suburban-urban divide. And the onus of the problem is on the suburbs. When you hear people like Brooks Patterson, the kinds of things he says about the city, boy, It's just crazy talk. So I think that the suburbanites here, some of the suburbanites, have to grow up and say, look, if we're going to grow, we need a great urban core that doesn't compete against the suburbs. It makes our city great. We have to overcome that suburban-urban divide, which is all across America, but seems particularly high-pitched in Detroit. The second thing is this overdependence on the car, as you said. And I think it's two things. One, I think, it's dangerous. Probably the most dangerous thing we do every day is get in our car and drive, especially if we're driving our kids around. I have 2 little kids. I don't drive very much, so I live in Toronto and don't drive very much. But the second thing is it takes a waste of productivity. It's just a waste of time and a waste of productivity. And thirdly, I think from the point of view of attracting talent, so many people today don't want to drive. So if they kind of say, well, I'm going to move to the Detroit Metro and I have to have a car, maybe they just stay where they are. So I think all of these things, and you have had this investment in the transit line through the Cass corridor and so forth, but I think, and all those great suburbs, when you look out those suburbs, the Ferndales, the Royal Oaks, the Burning, they were on the original rail line.
Well, and nowadays Royal Oak looks a lot like a Chicago streetcar suburb with the higher buildings, the more density, especially in that downtown area.
And that's what we have to do. We have to essentially, make sure that those rail lines are workable again and usable again, and then really think about streetcar suburbs and increase density around those and walkability and mixed use. So, I think that's a big thing. And of course, the other thing is how do we infill, the space in between the great core, the 5 miles in the core or so, and then, when we get to the Ferndale, Royal Oak area. So those are all challenges. But look, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, if you and I were having this conversation, we could have never dreamed of this. I wouldn't. When I was writing Rise of the Creative Class in the year 2000, if you had told me, oh, Richard, you're going to come back in the year 2018 and you're going to find the Foundation Hotel and you're going to find a thriving downtown filled with all these great restaurants and people walking around and Canadians from Windsor wandering around the streets saying, what bar or restaurant should I go for? And you told me I'd go to Pittsburgh and see this thriving thing, and even my hometown of Newark, which now in the downtown core is beginning, it's where Detroit was a decade ago. I would have said you're from the moon. So yes, I think the issues in Detroit's future are the ones we talked about: transport, transit, and I think there's a couple more. I think, as the city has redeveloped, there is a divide. There's a class divide and a racial divide. There's you see it. There's the new Detroit and the old Detroit. And I think keeping an eye on inclusion and equity and making sure that doesn't pull apart, making sure that the people who stayed here when Detroit lost 250,000 people feel like they're part of the new Detroit, the next Detroit. And I think Detroit has an advantage there. One, because it is a minority-majority city. It has a long history of political contestation through labor unions, through civil rights groups, through ethnic groups, labor and civic groups. And, it has a politics that's going to raise those issues and not let you gentrify or whitewash them away. So I think in that way, Detroit can be a laboratory, along with places like Pittsburgh, along with other places, in a more inclusive kind of growth. You don't want to end up where San Francisco, look, San Francisco is a very wealthy place and has tons of money, but, it's coming apart at the seams because of this deep divide. So I think Detroit has a chance to address that. And, one of the things that heartens me is whenever I talk to Mayor Dugan or hear him talk, that's the first thing he brings up. Basically I was a white guy elected by a city that's 80+% minority, and I've got to represent the people who stuck with this, not just the people who are coming here because it's a new great city to be in now.